All right, it's the top of the hour. It's 10 a.m., so let's go ahead and jump right in. My name is Catherine Mattice, and I'm going to, over the next hour, give you some keys to success when it comes to selling the idea of workplace bullying to your C-suite and selling them on the idea of change so that you can solve the workplace bullying. Before we get started, just a couple of gets, as I call them. Get ready to learn. Consider this a webinar that you paid for. I know there's a lot of distractions around you, but I've got a lot of great information to give you, so I want to make sure you have it all. So get ready to learn. Get out your pad and your pen so that you can take notes. Get your keyboard ready. This is going to be a very interactive webinar. I want to make sure to hear from you all throughout the webinar. And if you're all ready to learn, go ahead and type a yes in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and jump right in. All right, I see everybody is ready. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in here. So just if you're wondering if you're in the right place or not, wanted to make sure we're clear on that. You are in the right place if you know that there's bullying and you want to put a stop to it. You're in the right place if you aren't sure if you have workplace bullying and you want to learn more. You're in the right place if you are feeling bullied personally. You're in the right place if you're beating your head against the wall. You're frustrated with the bullying, you're frustrated with what's going on in your workplace and you can't seem to figure out how to solve it, or you're trying to solve it and it's not working. You know, if you're at the end of your rope, you're definitely in the right place. You're in the right place if you've tried some things to solve the workplace bullying and it's just not quite working the way you had hoped. You're in the right place if you want to learn more about what else you can do beyond the things you've tried so far. And you're in the right place if you don't have the support you need from leadership. Now, I created this webinar because in my own personal experience dealing with workplace bullying, I could not get my executive director to listen when I was asking him to help me solve the bullying. And also, as a consultant focus on the topic of workplace bullying, I find that I get a lot of calls from human resources or managers or people who are, in a position to maybe make a difference when it comes to workplace bullying, but they cannot seem to get approval for the budget. They can't seem to get their leaders on board. And so it's like, yes, I want to do this. I want to solve the bullying, but I just can't get the support I need. And after hearing that so many times, I decided I'm going to try to offer you some information to make it so you're not hitting that roadblock and to help you overcome that roadblock so that you can move forward and make a real difference. So we're going to talk about two things today. The first thing we're going to talk about is workplace bullying, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. If you've attended any of my webinars or seen me speak before, you've heard me define workplace bullying. I'm just going to spend a few minutes to make sure that we're all on the same page. And it'll help refresh your memory, and you can take some notes and think about how to talk about workplace bullying, how to describe workplace bullying when you're having that conversation with the C-suite. So hopefully that piece is useful for you. From there, we're obviously going to focus on why you're all here, which is the steps you need to take to convince your C-suite that bullying is a problem and that it's a problem that needs resolving. And I'm going to break that down for you in 3 steps. So I want to tell you my story before I jump into anything. This picture was taken at a graduation party when I graduated from undergrad at SDSU. I got my degree in communication at SDSU, and these were my girlfriends, and we had a party on the beach here in San Diego. And this one's me right there in the middle with the very, very, very unnatural blonde hair. This picture was taken about 2 weeks after I had gotten a job as the executive assistant for the executive director of a nonprofit organization that was here in San Diego. It's actually no longer around. So 2 weeks before I graduated from college, I had gotten this job and was extraordinarily excited to have gotten a job that seemed to kind of be a job that would push me down a certain career path. Over time in working there, I moved from executive assistant into human resources director and then into the director of compliance, which ultimately included human resources and some other compliance things that our organization needed to focus on. And about the time that this picture was taken, about 2 weeks into working there, I remember attending a staff meeting, and the executive director Gary was his name. Gary was going on about different things about the organization, and the bully that I worked with, Tony, I didn't know he was a bully at the time, but I remember sitting there watching Gary give this information, and Tony just kind of picking on the president in front of all of us. He was oh, no, that's not what we're doing, or, oh, I told you not to mention that, and he was just kind of talking down to the executive director. And I remember walking away from that meeting thinking to myself, well, that was an interesting meeting. I don't think I'd let somebody talk to me if I was the president. I wouldn't let somebody talk to me that way. And over time, I realized I was working with a bully. This person was an uber excessive micromanager. He was power hungry. He definitely bullied me. He definitely bullied the people in his department. He definitely bullied other people around the office, and he definitely bullied the executive director. And so it became very frustrating. So eventually I was feeling more like this. And so as the director of human resources, I was taking the brunt of this behavior. So I felt bullied, which was taking a toll on me. And I was dealing with the complaints. People were in my office crying all the time. I was sort of counseling people. And, I could see the organizational repercussions. I could see the damage that this person was causing the organization because of the position I held. And I could not figure out why the executive director wouldn't talk to the bully about his behavior. And I constantly was saying, you have to talk to him. He can't act this way. And the executive director would say, well, that's just how he is. I don't know why you let it bother you. Or I'd go to him and say, look, Danielle quit because of the way Tony was treating her. And the answer was, well, Danielle was just a file clerk. She wasn't going to be here forever anyway. It was always an excuse being made for why this guy's behavior wasn't that bad. And it just was really frustrating, and it really, really, really took a toll on me. And so while I was working at that organization, I eventually went on to get my master's degree. And my master's degree is also in communication. And I had a class called The Dark Side of Communication in graduate school. And we learned about dark things. I was learning about, domestic violence and sibling rivalry and stalking and dark things that happen in relationships. And so, of course, it's grad school. I had to write a paper on something dark. And so I decided to write a paper on my situation at work because it was really becoming a very black cloud for me. I was finding it hard to go to work. I didn't want to be there. It was a really dark time for me, to be honest. And so I decided to look up toxic leadership or find some topic that was related to the situation I was in. And that's when I came across the phrase workplace bullying, is when I was writing this paper for this class. And I learned that America actually is very far behind in research about workplace bullying, and we're far behind in laws about workplace bullying, and that this was a real thing that I was going through, and I wasn't crazy. And I just became really fascinated by what I was reading and realizing that what my situation was very real. And it was something that was being studied in the academic world. So for the rest of graduate school, every paper I wrote was about workplace bullying. I wrote my thesis on workplace bullying. I dedicated it to the post-it Nazi, which is what we called the bully in my workplace. And actually, he knows that I dedicated my thesis to him. So 1 point for me, right? And so just real quick side note, by the way, one of the girls in that picture got married a couple months ago. So here's all of us just a few months ago back together again and reunited. Anyway, so here I am now. I've been researching workplace bullying for 10 years and published on it. I've spoken around the world. I've spoken in Wales and Dubai and Canada on the topic of workplace bullying. I've written a book called Back Off, Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work with the foreword by Ken Blanchard. And I've worked with a huge array of organizations. I've worked with the third largest energy company in the world on down to a 20-person mom and pop fertilizer manufacturer. So I've worked with the gamut. I've worked with universities, hospitals, and over time I've just really been able to develop a wealth of knowledge on the very specific topic of workplace bullying. So let me share a success story with you. So one of my clients was an organization. They were a nonprofit, and they worked with people with disabilities, and their mission statement was to help people with disabilities become as much a part of the community as made sense for that person. So whatever that meant. For some people, it meant that they were able to walk around the block and get some fresh air. For others, it meant that they were able to go off and get jobs, but they needed, wheelchair access or whatever. So this company's focus was to make it so that people with disabilities could thrive in the community that they lived in. Well, they had workplace bullying, and what they started to realize, and what the executive director at this nonprofit started to realize, was that the bullying was preventing the people inside the organization from thriving. So here they had this mission, and their internal culture was going against that mission. And if people inside the organization aren't thriving, how can they help people outside the organization thrive? And so they, decided to put a stop to the bullying. And eventually, after about 6 months of working with this organization, the two worst bullies actually quit voluntarily. They decided they did not want to be a part of this more positive organization. They lost their social power, and therefore they were going to leave. So good riddance and goodbye. And how wonderful would that be if the workplace bully that's driving you bonkers just decided to leave one day? So I'm going to try to set you up for success in that regard. So tell me, I'm curious to know, what is one word that best describes how you feel about the workplace bullying in your organization? Give me one word. What do you feel about workplace bullying? All right, so John says that he feels scared, okay? What else? Colleen says mean. That's her one word, okay? Ming, frustrated, okay? What are some other words? Demoralized, okay. Absolutely. Riddell says tired. Okay, so I'm with you guys on these, on the way that you feel here. I'm with this, and Rodell, I guess I agree with you. Tired probably would have been the word back then that I would have typed in. I was just so done with dealing with this bully. And to finish out that story, I actually really let the bullying affect my performance, and it came to a point where my performance was so bad that my executive director came to me one day and asked me what was wrong, and he said, I've just noticed that everything that you used to be is gone. What's happened to you? You're not the person that you were when I hired you. And I said, I'm done. And I burst into tears. And, I did not expect to be having this conversation that day. I burst into tears and I just said, I cannot stand working here anymore. I can't stand the way that you allow this person to act this way. I can't stand that he drives people out. I can't stand it. And I said, you know what, maybe I need to put in my 30 days. So I found myself putting in a 30-day notice, it wasn't my plan for that day. And the boss said, you know what, if you're that unhappy, I don't want you here and you should probably leave now. And so I was asked to leave. He gave me a good review. It wasn't like a firing, but it was, it was basically, you're unhappy. I can see that. I don't necessarily need someone who's that unhappy here doing my human resources and my compliance. And turns out that that's a pretty standard thing to happen as well. Often the target is the one who's kind of seen as the problem and asked to leave. So here I protected this bully, and my situation was pretty standard. So again, I wanted to just talk briefly about what workplace bullying is, and I'm doing this, A, so that we're on the same page, and B, so that you have some ideas of things that you can say when you're talking to your C-suite about the bullying. So there are 3 characteristics that go along with the word bullying. The first is that bullying is repeated. So we are not talking about one time, John was mad at Bob and yelled, and Bob was upset, and then it was over. That's not bullying. Maybe incivility, but not bullying. Researchers who like to quantify things generally say that bullying happens at least once a week for a period of 6 months for them to kind of count it as bullying. That's not to say if someone comes to you and says, I'm being bullied, that you turn them away until it's been 6 months. But, it just so you have an idea of what we're talking about here. It's something that's happening pretty frequently and is going on for an extended period of time. Bullying creates a psychological power imbalance. So what happens is the bully picks on someone in some way. They send a little bit of a nasty email, they roll their eyes in a staff meeting, something happens that's, uncivil for the target. And for whatever reason, in that scenario, the target doesn't say anything. Maybe they brush it off, or they're afraid to, or they don't know what to do, so they don't do anything. And so the bully starts to push a little bit more, and the target continues to not speak up for themselves. So over time, the bullying becomes more and more frequent and more aggressive. And the bully eventually comes to realize, consciously, that I have power over this person. And the target comes to realize consciously, this person has power over me. So now we're in a relationship that's made up of psychological power imbalance, and that's not healthy for the workplace. Certainly there's power, we have hierarchy, but when that power imbalance is psychological, now we're talking about something that's related to or similar to something like domestic violence, where domestic violence, the physical violence, of course, is bad, but it's the mental hold that someone who's violent has over their victim that's the real problem. That's why people who are in relationships that have violence don't leave, because of the psychological part. And we have a similar relationship at work here. And so, that is a real reason to solve the bullying. You can't have relationships that you can equate to domestic violence happening in your workplace. Not okay. And of course, all of this causes harm to the targets and the witnesses. So lots and lots and lots of research that show that someone who feels bullied at work experiences anxiety, depression, they can't sleep, they're not eating. One researcher found that they're taking pills, that they become pill poppers. Thoughts of suicide. Absolutely, there's stories of people who have committed suicide and left a note about the workplace, so it was clear it was related to being bullied. And so, lots of physical and psychological damage for targets and also witnesses. So someone who doesn't necessarily feel like they're bullied, but they can see that somebody else is being bullied and that management isn't putting a stop to it, those people also experience anxiety and depression and fear. They're afraid that they'll be next, and they're concerned that managers won't speak up to them, so or won't speak up to the bully. So, all around damage is happening, not a good thing. So what are some bullying behaviors? Well, I like to bucket the behaviors into three buckets, three categories. The first category is aggressive communication. So communication you can see. Unfortunately, this is the least used kind of behavior from bullies. Most of us recognize that at work we cannot act out or we can get ourselves into trouble. No throwing people up against the locker to get their lunch money, right? But it does happen. So nasty emails, yelling, getting in someone's face. I was a subject matter expert on a case against Walmart, and that bully was getting in people's face, and then he would stick his finger in their nose and kind of fish hook them so that they couldn't walk away from him. That is passing into violence, of course, but it's obviously aggressive communication. The next bucket is acts aimed at humiliation. So pointing out mistakes in public is a big one that I hear, teasing someone, spreading rumors, telling management about mistakes that were made when they weren't that big of a deal. We all make mistakes, but making a bigger deal out of it than it needs to be, or constantly reporting things that happen with the target to managers. That's certainly humiliating. Sending out nasty emails and CCing people, that's humiliation. So doing things that make the person feel demoralized, as Kat had said in her word. And then finally, manipulation of work. So unfortunately, this is the most popular kind of bullying behavior because it is under the radar, it's insidious, and it's hard to see. Some examples are removing tasks that are imperative to someone's job. So if my, 90% of my job is, I don't know, doing some sort of report that I'm supposed to do that the leadership really requires and relies upon, if that's taken from me and I'm not given a reason, I would feel bullied. Why is this job that was important and a big part of what I was doing, why was that taken from me? I have a client right now, one of their big problems in terms of manipulation, they build airplanes. People are taking tools and hiding them. So, somebody can't do their job because they're missing a tool, and they spend a lot of their day looking for the tool. Now they're not meeting their quality scores and their productive scores. Using employee evaluations to write people up when maybe their performance isn't that bad, but claiming that the performance really is bad. So manipulation is hard because, again, it's sometimes hard to see. And, going back to the example with the tools, certainly nobody has to, if managers were to come down and say, where are those tools? I know one of you hid them. Nobody has to admit to it. Or they could say, we didn't hide them. He must have lost them, so it's very passive aggressive. The last thing I want to, I'm sorry, can you relate to this stuff? Can you, do these behaviors look familiar to you? Do these buckets, are you relating to these buckets? Do they make sense? And maybe you want to share some behaviors or things that you've seen as an example. I'd love to hear from you. All right, so I'm seeing some yeses. This is making sense to you. Okay. Okay, so one final slide on workplace bullying, and then we'll move into talking about how to sell change to your C-suite. So wanted to point out that at the very bottom is incivility and unprofessionalism. So for example, one person comes to work, so maybe they had a fight with their spouse that morning, so they're in a bad mood. They might fire off a few nasty emails, but eventually they get over it and, it's better and it's fine. Uncivil, but not workplace bullying. So that kind of behavior can turn into bullying. So remember I said that what researchers find, and also in my own experience, what I see is that a bully starts off engaging in minor, uncivil kinds of behaviors, doing little things that are unprofessional. And over time, as they realize that they have power over somebody, it turns into bullying. It becomes more and more frequent and more aggressive. And now, eventually it's turned into bullying. The real important thing here that I want to drive home is that harassment and discrimination, which of course are illegal, and you know that, are actually a subset of workplace bullying. Discrimination and harassment are the same thing as workplace bullying. The only difference is that if it's aimed at a protected characteristic, it's illegal and it's considered discrimination or harassment. If it's not aimed at a protected or at someone who has a protected characteristic, then it's bullying and it's not illegal. But it's scary that what makes something illegal or not is who it's aimed at. So one conversation to have with your CEO, because all CEOs know about discrimination and harassment, and all CEOs know they need to get rid of it or keep that from happening in the organization, is to tell your CEO, look, discrimination and harassment are the same thing as bullying. The only difference is who it's aimed at. Do we really want to be focusing on, well, is that person African American? Is that person Hispanic? Is that person of a certain religion? Or do we just want to get rid of all bad behavior and make it so none of this happens? So how do you want to spend your time? Dividing up who this was aimed at and whether or not it's illegal, or just removing all of it. So discrimination and harassment are bullying. The only difference is that it's aimed at a protected class. And so your CEO knows those things are illegal. So you could tie bullying into those two things and say, if there's bullying, we're certainly running the risk of liability for a legal case because all that has to happen is that bully to aim this at a protected class, and all of a sudden, we're in trouble. Mobbing and hazing are two other words that go along with bullying. Mobbing refers to a group of people focused on bullying one person, and hazing is a similar thing, and hazing is usually about a group of insiders mobbing one outsider. The difference between mobbing and hazing is that hazing usually comes to an end once the insiders feel like the outsider has been indoctrinated, versus mobbing, which seems to not really have an end in sight, but they're essentially the same things. And all of this can certainly turn into violence. So lots of court cases where somebody was being bullied and all of a sudden it turned into violence. So going back to that Walmart court case, this bully who had started off a little bit with violence by fish hooking people in the nose, eventually he got so frustrated with someone that he punched this person in the face. And so obviously now we're at violence. And the person who had been punched was able to sue Walmart because Walmart knew about the fish hooking and didn't say anything about it. And so it's basically Walmart's fault that this person had been punched because they did not put a stop to the bullying. So bullies can absolutely turn into a violent situation. Another example was a surgeon who was bullying a perfusionist, which I think is the person who monitors all of the things happening. They're monitoring the heart rate and all of the computers and stuff in surgery. And the surgeon was a bully, and eventually one day he was so frustrated with this perfusionist that he lifted his fist and was about to punch the perfusionist. He did not ultimately do that. He realized what he was doing and walked out of the room, but now this person was afraid for their life and afraid of being punched, and was able to file a court case. So those are some examples. Okay, so all of these behaviors, whether it's discrimination, harassment, mobbing, hazing, bullying, violence, it's repeated behavior, it's about power, it's harmful to targets and witnesses, and of course it's costly. So again, one of the tricks in talking to your CEO is just lumping bullying into harassment and discrimination and letting your CEO know that bullying is ultimately illegal if it's aimed at a protected class. And do we really want to spend time hashing out that very minor detail, or do we just want to make sure that we're safe from liability? So what roadblocks do you face in talking with your C-suite? I'm just curious, what, there's obviously some roadblock you're facing that inspired you to jump on this webinar. I'm just curious, what are those roadblocks? What's the issue you face? What is keeping you from being able to stop workplace bullying? All right, so resources, I'm seeing time, support. What else? What are some things that are keeping you from the good old boy network? Okay, so a group of people who all have been there for a long time, perhaps. Okay, support from HR. Okay, so that's interesting. So not getting the support you need. All right. Kat, I'd love to chat with you more about your situation with the Good Old Boy Network. We have to figure out how to break that up a little bit, right? Colleen, your support from HR, we can certainly talk more about that too, and hopefully some of this stuff I'm talking about you can bring to HR's attention. Time is certainly a factor. A few of you put time that obviously making a change like this is going to eat up some time. So all right, well, let's talk through this, okay? So let's talk about your CEO. Let's jump into the meat of this whole thing. You might have the best CEO in the world or the best HR in the world, and they are just not able to see the damage that bullying is causing. So there are 3 steps that you need to sort of think through as you're thinking about how to talk to your C-suite or your HR about workplace bullying. So the first is to identify the hot buttons. So let's talk through that. I've given you a list here on the screen of ideas to be thinking about. Certainly there's a million other hot buttons that you could think of, but this will hopefully help jog your brainstorming. So a hot button is something that your C-suite or your CEO or your director of HR talks about a lot. And if you can figure out what's important to them and then phrase workplace bullying in that context, that will make a big difference in their receiving the information and being able to listen to what you have to say about workplace bullying. Let me give you 2 examples. I worked for a startup firm for a while, and this is not my actual CEO, but he looks a little bit like my CEO at that company. So my CEO, Rick, was focused on making money. That was his hot button. And I know that because he had a mentor. He had several mentors, but he went to lunch with one of his mentors one day, and he returned from that lunch kind of scoffing openly about the conversation he'd had with this mentor. The mentor had told him that he needed to have a vision and a mission statement in order to grow his business. And he was scoffing like, I don't need a vision. My vision's to make money. What's your vision? And, it was kind of funny to him because if you've ever worked in a startup, you know that that's kind of the point, right? Anybody who's in a startup, you put in long hours for not a lot of pay because you're hoping to kind of make it big. You're like gold miners. You're hoping that you get that venture capitalist money so that you can, um, move up and become the next Microsoft or whatever. So his goal was to make money. And a lot of times he would kind of even joke. He'd walk through the office sometimes and point at you and say, hey, Catherine, what's your goal? What's your vision? And you'd say to make money. So I know that that was his hot button. That's what he was focused on. And if I was going to talk to him about workplace bullying, I would need to talk about it in the context of making money or how it was preventing us from making money. Contrast that with a different hot button. So the CEO of Domino's, his hot button currently, I would venture to guess, is branding. And I guess that because of the commercials that Domino's has been putting out. So if you remember, when he first became the CEO of Domino's, he had a commercial and he basically said, I'm the new director, the new CEO of Domino's, and Domino's recipe for pizza sucks. It's gross. I know that, and I'm going to change it. So right away, he was breaking down, this barrier between him and his customers. I get it. I know that we're not the best pizza. We're going to fix that. Um, and so that's one branding thing he did. Also, lately he's been doing commercials where the commercial for Domino's is some Domino's workers exploding or breaking down the word pizza from underneath Domino's. So Domino's is rebranding. They're not Domino's Pizza anymore. They're just Domino's because they want you to understand that they also serve sandwiches and things other than pizza. So if you are going to talk to this CEO about workplace bullying, you'd have to talk about it in the context of branding. You'd have to say, this is affecting our brand because maybe workers who feel bullied are talking about it on social media, and that's going to affect our brand. Or let's look at Glassdoor. That's going to affect our brand. So what I'm saying again is that you have to think about what are the things that your CEO or HR are focused on, and how can you frame bullying in that context? So what are your thoughts? What are your CEO's hot buttons? I'd love to hear from you. What are the hot buttons that you could maybe focus on in talking about workplace bullying? All right, so I'm seeing customer service is one. Okay. Money. A couple of you are putting money. What others? Education of our clients. Okay, so you must be a group that educates clients in some way. Okay, so think about your hot buttons. Reputation. Okay, reputation is so kind of branding, same kind of thing. So you could talk about bullying in that context of how it's going to hurt your reputation. If you take a look at Glassdoor, are there comments about bullying there? Okay, so I wanted to point you to a worksheet. There's a little handout section in your control panel, and there's a worksheet there to kind of walk you through the rest of what we're going to go through. So maybe download that, and I'll absolutely email it to you after the webinar is over. But something to think about. Is these hot buttons, and you can do that on that worksheet. So in addition to the hot buttons, in addition to those whatever it is your CEO is focused on. Every CEO is indeed focused on the bottom line, of course, and there are kind of three ways to look at the bottom line. Some CEOs are focused on reducing costs. Some CEOs are focused on protecting revenue, and some CEOs are focused on growing revenue. And certainly part of what they're focused on will be about where your organization is at, or what's happening in your industry, or what's happening in the environment. So CEOs can kind of move in and out of these, but I would venture to guess that right now in this very moment, your CEO is focused on the bottom line in one of these three ways. So again, that CEO that I worked with at the startup, he was focused on making money, growing revenue. That was how he looked at the bottom line. Contrast that with the CEO I worked with where I had the workplace bully. That CEO was always focused on protecting revenue. So whenever he talked about the bottom line, it was about how to keep things where they're at. And so, another thing to be thinking about. So in addition to your hot button, whether it's reputation or branding or marketing or customer service or whatever it is, in addition to that, your CEO is focused on the bottom line in one of these three ways. So again, frame the bullying in the context of the hot button and the context of the bottom line. So I would love for you to write that down. I think this is probably one of the most important things. Connect bullying to the hot buttons and to the bottom line. So write that down in your notebook. So how do you connect bullying to the bottom line? In telling you to do that, I'm saying that you have to talk about the costs of workplace bullying. And I'm going to give you some things, some ways to do that. So take a look at this picture here. This is what bullying looks like in your organization. So the rest of this house is standing just fine. Everything else is working just great. The rest of the structure of the home is just fine. But obviously there's a structural problem with the chimney. And as you can see, eventually when that chimney falls over, it's going to take part of the house with it. It's definitely going to take some of the roof and probably some of the side of the house and perhaps some of the rest of the chimney. So one of the problems that people like us face in trying to solve workplace bullying is that the CEO can see that the house is standing. You're maybe meeting your production scores, you're meeting your quality scores, whatever. And so in their mind, the bullying is not that bad. But if you can point out that the bullying is a structural damage that at the moment maybe can't be seen, maybe it's, if you're standing in front of the house, you can't see the chimney problem in the back, but that eventually it's going to topple, whether it's through a court case because the bully pushed it a little too far and it turned into harassment or discrimination or violence, whether it be that somebody really important to the organization quits because of the bullying. So the bully is structural damage and it needs to be solved. Structural damage is obviously very expensive. So when there's a workplace bully, all of these things go up in the organization. Absenteeism, turnover, wasted time. In fact, the Canadian Safety Council found that when there's a bully, people who are around the bully spend up to 52% of their day talking about the bully. So that's a lot of wasted time. All of this stuff goes down when there's a workplace bully. Everything that needs to be going up is going down. So this is how you can talk about the costs of the bullying. So I'm going to give you a second to take a look at this list. I'm going to take a drink of water. Okay, so let me ask you, can you see some of that damage in your workplace? What do you see? What resonated with you from that list? What is the damage that the bully is causing in your organization? Okay, so one person quit that you thought was really valuable. Okay, so turnover, not a good thing. What else? You guys have a comment on Glassdoor about bullying. Okay, so there's some damage. What else? What's some of the damage that you can see? Okay, so you can see that people are not producing. They're feeling a little worn out, okay? Other comments about the damage you're seeing? Okay. Obviously, bullying is a waste of money, right? And that's what you have to talk to your bully or to your CEO about. So let me give you some numbers, another number to write down, something else to write down here. The average cost of a bully in an organization of 1,000 people is $1.2 million. And that comes from Charlotte Rayner. She is a famous workplace bullying researcher. And after doing some research on it, trying to figure it out, this is the number she came to. Something else to write down, 11% of targets are customers. That number comes from OSHA. They have a research arm called NEOSH, and OSHA's research arm did some studies on workplace bullying, and they discovered that 11% of targets are customers. Something to write down. So going back to our 3 steps, you have to gather evidence in order to prove that there's something affecting your bottom line. So you figured out what the hot buttons are, and now you're going to gather evidence around the hot button and around the bottom line and the way that the CEO looks at it. So let's talk about that. I have 2 options for you. The first option is to literally just sit down at your computer, open up an Excel sheet, and just start brainstorming how much money has this person cost us. And you can just kind of think about who left, how much did that cost us, how much money have we spent on hiring replacements, did we lose a client because of the bullying? You know, so if you can start to figure out what does this person cost, and again, you can just kind of sit down and start to quantify things. That's one option, and I absolutely recommend you do that. Another option is to do a prevalence audit. Now, a prevalence audit will give you the opportunity to really understand who's bullying, where the bullying is happening, and the kind of damage it's causing. So this will give you maybe more accurate information than the Excel sheet, but in some cases, the Excel sheet may be your only option. You may not be able to do a prevalence audit, and I get that, but I want to talk you through the value of a prevalence audit. So I'm going to do that by sharing a case study with you. I worked with an organization that created aluminum powder. Apparently, aerospace uses aluminum powder, and they also use spheres made out of aluminum powder. So this manufacturing company made aluminum powder, and they made you know, they would also create the spheres made out of this powder that apparently aerospace uses. So NASA is one of their clients, and airplane manufacturers are their clients. So that's what they did. They were in the business of aluminum powder. So what happened was the CFO was serving as kind of the HR director of operations kind of guy, as CFOs often do in small businesses. I think there's only about 100 people there. And the CFO could see that the bullying was causing a lot of problems, and he could not get the CEO to buy into it. So the CFO was going to the CEO a lot and saying, we have a bully, this person is bullying, we have to fix it. And the CEO would say, no, it's not that bad. You know, why are you so hung up on this? So I think part of the issue was that the bully had started at this organization as an intern in college and had eventually worked his way up into being the person who ran the manufacturing part. He was in charge of all of this aluminum powder and the people who created it. And so the CEO couldn't understand how this young, 21-year-old that had come to them at that when he was 21 had grown into a man who had become a bully. And so I think the CEO had a bit of a soft spot for him. So the CFO said to the CEO, I found someone who can do a prevalence audit for us. It's going to be super cheap. She's going to do it for us. And if I can prove to you that there's a bully, then we can fix it. And if it turns out that there isn't a bully, I'll let it go and I won't bring it up anymore, and this problem will be tabled and it'll be over and done with and we won't have to deal with it. So the CEO said, okay, I'll fork over a couple $1,000 to do this prevalence audit just to get you to shut up about it. So it was a very cost-effective, thing that the CFO was selling to the CEO. What I discovered in the audit was the hot buttons of the CEO. The CEO told me, and these are his words, the CEO told me that his vision was to rule the world when it comes to powder. That was his hot button. He talked about it a lot. We were going to rule the world when it comes to this aluminum powder. The CEO said that another thing he was really focused on was ensuring everyone communicates with each other and that everyone thinks and acts for the good of the whole. So these were the three hot buttons of this CEO. These were the three things that were totally important to him. And if you look at 2 and 3, already the bully is directly violating 2 out of the 3 hot buttons. And certainly we could make a case that bullying was also violating hot button number 1, right? So I did the audit, and what I discovered was that indeed they did have a very toxic workplace. And in fact, over half of the workforce was considering leaving. That's an appalling thing to discover in any organization. But in this organization, it was sort of extraordinarily appalling because this organization was in a small town up in Northern California. There wasn't a lot going on around this organization. It was, kind of in the middle of nowhere. So a lot of people graduated from high school, moved over to work in this manufacturing company, and they never left because there was nowhere else to go. And so a lot of people were lifetime employees, and that was something the CEO was very proud of. And here I'm learning that all of these people who the CEO had thought would be there forever were actually talking to each other about leaving and where would they go. And so this was really appalling for the CEO to learn about. We also learned in the audit that the sales process was causing conflict. So what happened was the sales force would take in an order for aluminum powder from a client, and they would walk it over to the bully who managed the manufacturing, the person who was responsible for filling this order. And the salesperson would say, here's an order from our client. We need this filled. When can we have it done by? And I'll let the client know. And the bully would look at the sales form and say, well, you didn't fill out question number 4 on page 2, so I'm not going to fill the order. You're going to have to call the client back. So he was using the sales process as a way to bully the salespeople. And the salespeople were telling me, we don't think question number 4 on page 2 is important. It shouldn't even be on there. But the bully won't fill the order unless we get this information. So there was a real conflict between the sales people and the bully. And that's not a good thing. You can't rule the world when it comes to powder if the sales team feels bullied, right? Some other things we learned unrelated to the bullying were that supervisors wanted supervisor training. They were being promoted through the ranks without ever getting any kind of training, and that was frustrating for them. They were vying for information about how to be better supervisors. I learned that there was no formal performance measurements. People didn't really understand how performance was calculated. They didn't really understand the performance evaluation form, and that was bothersome to them. And finally, I also learned, also unrelated to the bullying, that the maintenance manager was not a good project manager. So people would submit maintenance requests for machines to be fixed to the maintenance manager, and then it was a 50-50 chance as to whether or not that thing would be fixed. And that was causing conflict as well, because the bully would have his team try to fix it on their own, and they don't know how to fix machines. That's not what they do. And so it was definitely a situation that was hindering the ability to be, an effective aluminum manufacturer. So if you're going to do a prevalence audit, which I highly recommend doing if you can at all, I'm going to give you 2 ways to do your audit. There's sort of 2 options here. So with the manufacturing firm, this aluminum powder manufacturer, the issue was that there was one person who was a bully, and that person and everybody else knew that I was there doing the audit because of him. So he was already feeling a little isolated. Yes, we're frustrated with the bully, but we have to still kind of be PC around this, right? So it would not have been a good idea for me to come in and say, tell me how this person bullies you, and tell me all about the bullying. I'm here because of that guy. So rather than focusing the questions on him specifically and asking about, the bully and really highlighting that, I asked more general questions that would give me some information about the bullying, you know, and I knew that they would talk about the bully by asking these kinds of questions, but now I'm not so focused on just the bully, and that was the more appropriate way to go. So if your bully is you know, messing with your climate, messing with your culture, you don't necessarily need to ask just about the bullying. You can ask about what's happening on a much higher level and get a lot more information about things that need to be addressed. So you'll want to come up with questions about, you know, the organization as a whole. What about our communication? What about our climate? What do you like about working in this organization? What do you not like about working in this organization? How are your relationships with the people that you work with? These are all great questions that will get at the bullying without necessarily asking about the bully. So in some cases, that might be the best way to do a prevalence audit. The other option is to indeed ask exactly about the bullying. So this is a more appropriate way to go when there's a group of people who are bullying, or it's really clear that bullying is a problem. Everybody knows it. You could use this as a way to sort of pop the elephant in the room. For example, I did some training for an ER department, or an ER, an emergency room at a hospital. And the problem was that there was a lot of people bullying each other. A lot of people were bullies. A lot of people felt victimized. And the manager of the emergency room basically said, there's bullying happening here and we're going to fix it. So in that case, doing a prevalence audit that's focused on the bullying itself would have been more valuable. Rather than tiptoeing around it, the goal was to say, we know there's bullying and we're going to solve it. And so we did a prevalence audit that was focused on bullying. So that's the other option. So you have to decide in doing your prevalence audit which direction makes more sense for you. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you to help you make that decision if you're not sure which route to go. So do you do the kind of more general route, or do you really just focus on bullying? Those are your options. So how is this feeling for you? What are your thoughts on doing a prevalence audit? Is this something you think is possible? Do you feel like this is something you can implement? What are your thoughts on the audit? I'm curious to hear from you. How are you feeling so far about what we're talking about? Okay, some of you are saying this seems like a lot of work. You're not sure if you'd even get buy-in on this, on the audit. Okay, what else? Other thoughts on this? You're feeling like you could do this and that it's reasonable. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm getting some kind of mixed reviews on the audit. And that's okay. I'm going to give you some other tips to kind of help you, make this feel better for those of you that are feeling like maybe you couldn't do the audit. So again, back to our 3 steps, you're going to identify your hot buttons, you're going to gather evidence, whether through the Excel sheet exercise or doing the prevalence audit, and then you have to offer a solution to your CEO. So curious, what solutions have you offered? What solutions have you offered so far? Mediation, okay. Let's talk about mediation. There is some evidence in the research to suggest that mediation is not necessarily the right option. So I don't want to, you know, poo-poo your solution or your idea, but I just want to talk with you a little bit about it. The problem with mediation in a situation where there's workplace bullying is that the power imbalance makes mediation maybe not the right way to go. So if you think about a romantic relationship or a marriage that has domestic violence, where there's power imbalance that's psychological and physical, you probably would not have that couple go to a mediation to solve their problems. The answer is that the person who's engaging in the domestic violence has to stop, right? That's what needs to happen. And the same, because they're comparable behaviors, the same thing for workplace bullying. In asking someone who feels bullied to go sit across a table from the bully and talk about it, is putting the target in a pretty uncomfortable position. And what generally research has found in doing mediation is that the bully walks away more angry than they were that the behavior's been highlighted. And because the mediator doesn't really have the ability to solve the bullying or get the bully to stop, it's more about let's solve our differences, that it could actually make the bullying worse. So I applaud you for trying to think of solutions and providing those, but just wanted to kind of put that tidbit out there for you, something to think about in doing this. So I want to offer you some solutions. So I'm going to tell you about the solutions I provided in the audit I did for this manufacturing company, and then I'm going to give you just some random solutions that you can implement that are pretty cost effective. So going back to my case study here, one of the things we were able to recommend or that we were able to implement was a conflict resolution mediation for, that I just said maybe isn't the best idea, for the sales department and the bully. So what we did was have them sit at a table and talk through the order form and talk about why certain things were important to fill out. The bully was able to say, here's why I really focus on, question 4 on page 2 that nobody ever fills out. Here's why I need to know that. So the bully was able to educate the sales team on why the form had certain things that needed to be filled out. And the sales team was able to say, well, here's why we can't get that information very well, or here's why we don't like asking that question. And so they were able to sort of redesign the sales form in a way that made sense for both of them now that they were able to educate each other on where they were at, so that we took the power away from the bully. He was no longer able to use the sales form as a way to bully because now it was a form that they'd all agreed to. So we pulled the power away from him. We did also get a coach for the workplace bully, and it was very important to the CEO to save him. He felt he was important. He'd been there forever, and that's fine. So it became a performance issue where the bully was put on a performance improvement plan that included coaching, and if the bullying didn't change, then the bully would be self-selecting out, by not doing what he was supposed to be doing. But, so now it's up to the bully to make the change and to spend time really understanding why he couldn't act that way. The other thing was when I had done the audit, we realized that everybody really did understand that vision. So that this vision that they were going to rule the world when it comes to powder, it was really cool to see that the CEO mentioned that. And then as I interviewed people, everyone talked about that. We're going to rule the world. And so although it wasn't a formal vision and it wasn't really something that was talked about often, somehow the vision had made its way through the organizational members. And so one of the recommendations was to focus on the vision. Let's make that formal. Let's put signs everywhere that says that's what we're going to do. Let's create strategic plans every year about achieving that vision, so that is what's directing us. And then anybody who acts in a way that violates that vision, now you have a reason to discipline them or talk to them about it. We also implemented a formal performance management system. We did supervisor training because that's what they wanted, and we did project management training for that maintenance manager who was having a hard time following through on projects. So let me give you some simple solutions that you can indeed offer up when you're talking to your C-suite. One is to ask each department to create a lunch and learn on a topic related to a positive workplace. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can just say, hey, every department's going to pick a topic related to building a positive workplace. It might be communication skills, it might be optimism, it might be resilience, it might be diversity, or whatever it is. Every department's going to pick a topic and they're going to create a training around it. So this can be something that can be a lot of fun. Not every department will be good at training, but it'll be a good exercise for them to figure out a way to get creative and offer a training. Another thing you could suggest is that each of your managers receive a book about leadership of some kind. There's a million out there. I can make some recommendations if this is something that's of interest to you. And then hold a weekly book club to discuss discuss each chapter. So this, again, cost effective. You can buy books on Amazon often for $3 to $5, and then, you know, spend a little time each week talking about the book. Another solution you could offer is to ask each department to create and implement one action item related to a positive workplace. So you could, you know, again, talk to each department manager and say, hey, I'd love for you to create some sort of action item, whatever it is you want to do, and start implementing that. So it may be that they could go volunteer for a day at Habitats for Humanity. Maybe it's that they decide in their staff meetings they're going to do something related to positivity. Maybe they're just going to have a party. You know, whatever it is, give them the opportunity to come up with something to be positive. In the end, eradicating bullying gets results. And I realize we're getting close to 11 o'clock here. I'm going to get through the rest here in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A. Eradicating bullying gets results. If you have a civil work environment, you have improved communication and relationships. People are talking to each other, which means that they can make better decisions, they're more innovative, they're learning. And if they're doing those things, they're engaged and motivated. And if they're engaged and motivated, they're coming to work. And if they're coming to work, they're increasing their productivity and customer service, they're meeting goals, and they're meeting the bottom line. So having a civil workplace is absolutely the cornerstone to your bottom line, 100%. There's a really great book called Positive Leadership by a guy named Kim Cameron. He's a real famous researcher in the world of positive psychology. And his book, Positive Leadership, talks about this metaphor. He talks about the fact that people grow towards the light. They do not grow in the dark. They grow towards the light. And you have to create a workplace that's full of light in order for people to grow. They're not going to grow in a dark and dingy cave where they're afraid. They're going to grow, and your organization is going to grow when there's light. Just like plants, we need the sun, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can now sell bullying to and your solution to the CEO, knowing these 3 hot buttons that or these 3 steps? You're going to come up with the hot buttons. You're going to figure out a way to provide some evidence, whether it's through the Excel sheet that you're going to do on your own or a prevalence audit, and you're going to come up with some solutions. How confident are you that you can do these things that I've offered up on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the most confident. Okay, so I'm seeing some low numbers. I'm seeing some 7 and 8s. I'm seeing some 2s and 3s. So I'm seeing a 5, okay. I see a 0. Here's the thing. This is a hard conversation to have with your CEO, and here is where you might be. You might be feeling like this is hard. You might be feeling frustrated and tired and demoralized and all of the words that you gave me earlier. And you might feel alone in doing this, that you may feel like you're the only person who really can see the damage the bullying is causing, or you might feel like everybody else can see it, but you're the only one who's kind of willing to take a stand on it. And, you know, I'm here to help you. So there's 2 ways you could do this. You could be the tortoise or the hare. I'm not trying to offend anybody by calling you a tortoise, but you know, to do this on your own could take some time. You're going to have to figure it out along the way. There's a lot to understand about bullying and why it's happening and how to solve it that you have to learn as you go. Or you can be a hare and try to just kind of rip that Band-Aid off and make a real difference. And I'm here to help you do that. So I'm going to make an offer to you. I'm going to offer you the prevalence audit in a survey format and a written report that will tell your organizational leaders about the strengths in your organization. It will talk about the bullying, and it will offer up some solutions based on what I learned in the survey. And I will also offer a complimentary coaching session. I will sit down with you and your leaders and go over the report and the survey and help you come up with a plan for solving the bullying. Now, normally the 2 items at the top, just the audit and the report, are a flat rate of $3,500. I will do the audit, the report, and I'll throw in a coaching session for only $2,500. I will do all of these things for you, and it will make a real difference. As you saw with the case study that I presented, you know, the CEO sometimes needs a kick in the pants, and it's easy to tell a CEO, look, I think there's bullying. I think that we need to solve it. I found someone, it's $2,500. We can, pull that out. It's not that hard. It's not a ton of money. Pull out $2,500 and let me prove to you that the bullying is causing a problem, and let me prove to you that there are some things that we need to do to solve it. And I am here to help you do that. So are there any questions about this at all? Any questions about anything I've talked about today? Any questions about doing the audit? Any questions about my offer? Okay, so one question is, I can't get buy-in for the problem. How would I get buy-in for the audit? Here's the thing. The bullying is costing your organization a lot of money, and if you've made any sort of recommendation for a solution, any sort of training recommendation or anything like that, that costs money, right? I think you have the ability to get buy-in to do the audit for something that only costs $2,500. Any organization, no matter your size, can pull $2,500 out to make a difference. So if you can talk to your CEO, again, in the context of those hot buttons, and if your CEO is just saying, look, I don't think this is a problem, I don't want to do this, then your answer is, look, let me prove it to you. And, just like that CFO at that manufacturing firm, if it turns out there's nothing and I'm being dramatic, then fine. We'll, problem solved. We'll close the door on this issue and I won't ever bring it up again. But what if there is a problem? Wouldn't you want to know about it? And it's, here's a chance for us to learn more about it for a really small price. And so that's your answer is we can continue going on like this, or we can put this to rest once and for all. Okay, another question, how long will it take? I would just do a survey with you, so it just depends on how long it takes for your employees to fill it out. So depends on where you're at. If you're in a really busy time right now, we may keep the survey open for a month. If you're not really busy, we may just do it in a week. So it just kind of depends on where you're at with your employees. And then writing up the report, would take me a few days, and then we'd be able to talk through the solution. So this could take us just a couple weeks, or it could take a couple months, depending on your situation. Okay, what's the report look like? Okay, well, I've done reports that are 5 pages, and I've done reports that are 30 pages. So it's not about what it looks like, it's about what's in the report. So the report will be a Word document that, again, it talks about the strengths that your organization has. It'll talk about, the bullying and what the problems are related to the bullying. And I may discover some other things, like I did in that manufacturing firm. And then I will offer up some solutions for you. And then to be able to sit down and talk through the report, talk about making a real business case. So, all right. So with that, looks like there aren't any other questions. Again, the offer is an audit, a report, and the coaching. I'm going to do that for you for $2,500. If you're interested, type yes right now in the chat box, or send me an email or shoot me a text or give me a call within the next 24 hours, and I will offer that price to you. So I'm looking for some yeses. Anybody who's interested? Okay, Rodell, I can see that you're saying yes. I will definitely reach out to you in the next day. Ming, Ming says she's ready. All right. Thanks for that, Ming. Susan says she's interested. Okay. So I will absolutely reach out to you 3. And, if you're not really sure, that's fine. Contact me. We can talk more about it. I can give you more information about it, and we can go from there. So thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll look forward to talking with you in the future.